Hang on. Turning down the radio. Wasn't watching the clock very closely.
Hello, Barry.
Hello. Let's see. Yeah, I was texting with Anne Marie there, and we got into an interesting conversation on some of her research, and I wasn't watching the clock at that point.
Very good. One should have those.
Yeah. In fact, you might even be interested in the topic she brought. I think she posted her concept on Facebook, which she mentioned in the chat, but I hadn't gone back to see where it is in Facebook. But I can probably tell you what it is because she says it's going around in the Facebook thing. Let's say I have to. How do I do that? I gotta get my mouse over here.
So just checking, how's my audio microphone sensitivity at the moment?
You're plenty loud today.
Okay.
No problem. So let me just go back real quick. And let's see, I want to close that and go back to the chat thingy. I don't want that.
Be right back. I'm trying to turn on some AI stuff.
Okay.
Okay. Am I back?
Yeah. Actually, I haven't found where Anne Marie posted it on Facebook. I don't see it in her own timeline, but it must be in some other conversation. Let me just refresh myself. Yeah, she picked up a discussion. Let me just see where I. Oh yeah, shared across Facebook. Oh, she hasn't necessarily responded to it. Well, no, she says I've been referring to this article that's been shared across Facebook. So I guess I don't want to breach confidence here, but I don't think it is. She says there's an article that's been shared across Facebook entitled "Character and Leadership: Situating Servant Leadership in a Proposed Virtues Framework," and that appears in the International Journal of Leadership Studies, and includes a chart called the Virtue Continuum Chart that's been going around social media. Although I don't know where on Facebook that turns up, but she says it's been going around social media. And then she kind of riffs on that, but she gives this chart. First of all, can I paste a chart into the chat? Let me just see if that's still allowed or is allowed on Facebook. I mean, not Facebook, on.
I think I've seen it work, although I haven't done it much myself.
Yeah, it does. Okay, so she takes this chart. It's in the chat. It's in the Zoom chat.
Mm-hmm.
Out of this article, which I can give you the link to the article if you want it. But the point is that on this virtue continuum, if you have a deficit of virtues or an excess of virtues, you're on the outer parts of these.
Yes. I've actually seen this chart. In fact, I've posted it years ago myself.
Okay, so evidence around. So basically it says that if you want to have a sustainable culture or a sustainable ethnic group, you kind of want to be relatively abundant in the middle column, although not entirely, perfectly balanced, but have an abundance of the middle traits. That's my conclusion. An abundance.
So why not perfectly balanced?
Because, and the reason not perfectly not 100% in the middle, is because there will be times when you have to take a risk in life or death situations. And so if you throw in some probability for occasional departures from the middle column, when would those risks be prudent? And the answer is, in life or death situations, sometimes you're going to have to take a let's see, I'm actually not sure now which one I would pick, but
in a life or death situation, I can see respect going out the window if you have to be autocratic in order to save everyone's life.
yeah. So respect of a say a villainous person, respecting the desires of a villainous person, you might want to say, if somebody's really villainous, then giving them too much leeway, giving them too much elbow room, too much respect would be imprudent.
Yeah,
So
it's like
that's a good
tolerance
example.
for the intolerant.
Yeah. So the point is that a perfectly 100% down the middle is probably has some downside, and so from time to time you have to take a risk to deviate from it by some amount. Where if you didn't deviate, you would actually maybe end up in worse situation. I don't know. This is sort of off the top of my head. But what's interesting about this, and this kind of gets back to Anne Marie's point, was that in some of the published literature on this stuff, people bring up where these ideas come from. And some people say, well, they come from theology and morality studies. And other people say, well, no, it doesn't have to be. It can come from secular sustainability studies. And I say, yeah, in fact, a lot of secular sustainability theory, you can find similar ideas back in earlier theological or morality studies. But you can also argue that the theologians were among the first to begin using secular systems thinking, even though they didn't call it that then. The so-called ninth intelligence, which can be secular or it can be found in theological or morality plays as well.
Yeah.
But anyhow, and that kind of jives with my notion that you can get a lot of morality or theology straight out of secular systems thinking if you use system models that are close to the ground truth about human
Yes.
dramatic dynamics.
See, on that one, I think we're very much aligned. I
Yeah.
recognize the historical role that theology and theological analytic thinking has played.
Yeah.
But I think that as we understand more, that as we observe more, as we deduce more, as we model more, we have better and better.
It's no longer the sole source. Initially, it was the sole source of some of these ideas, but then secular systems thinking comes along and says, you can still get to it without theology. You can get to it in a secular reasoning fashion, which is relatively new historically.
So the nod to theology acknowledges the derivation, but we should probably then focus more on the non-theistic views and derivations.
But still giving credit to the pioneers who
that's what history does. All of history is trying to recognize the whole flow of ideas and the evolution of ideas.
Right. So you give credence to the pioneers of systems thinking, even if they weren't perfectly rigorous secular systems thinking, but they were on the right track and they helped seed the development of the secular version of their.
They're as rigorous as they knew how to be.
Right. Exactly.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Science is as rigorous as it knows how to be, and then it learns more, and it becomes, in some sense, improved.
Science has to rule out falsehoods, and that's really hard to do. There's a lot of falsehoods that survive for a very long time before science, math, and engineering rule them out.
Right. So in fact, I think this dovetails nicely into the topic that arose this week, which I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about if it's of interest to you.
Yeah.
And that is, I posted something about truth and subjective truth. You know, where someone says this whole notion of using this language, my truth, your truth, the truth.
Yeah.
Remember that crap? Okay. But one of the comments on that was define truth. And I thought that was actually a reasonable comment. So I spent some time this week trying to come up with my definition of truth, which is not going to be too different, I think, than what the accepted scientific notion is. But I wanted to bring it past you and see what you think.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I tend to use the adjective ground truth to mean a universal truth, as opposed to something that may be temporarily true for a person and temporarily true for a culture, but is eventually going to fall by the wayside.
Okay, so I'm going to go blow my nose. Oh, a bird flew into my house. See, I have the back door and a bunch of windows open now. And I have a bird now sitting on my coffee machine.
Do you know what species it is?
Gail would know, but I don't know.
Yeah, because Jimmy Kimmel had a bird fly into his house and he featured it.
Remember that? I saw a shtick on that. Yeah.
The mourning dove and the hawk.
Yeah. I'm blowing my nose, bird.
Okay.
Okay. So I want to at least acknowledge my friend Shampa Banerjee, I think is her name, Shampa Banerjee. She's a friend that I met through Kimberly Weefling, but she was the one that said define truth, and I thought that was reasonable. So here's my attempt to do so. Okay. Let me see if I can find where I put that. I have a place where all my collected Collaborology thoughts are. Okay, here it is. I found it. What is truth? Okay, so I think that it's not as simple as most people would try to find in a dictionary, but let me, geez, my browser is not responding. Let me go to a different app. Am I frozen, Barry?
No, I just wanted to let Anne Marie know that if she wanted to join us, she could, but she's got to get back to her report card, she says. So she's got other obligations at being a teacher. So are you frozen? That was the question. Your video is frozen, but I don't think your audio is frozen because you asked me. Speak. Oh, now you're not. Oh, now you're back on another machine. Your first machine apparently has lost access to the internet because it's frozen. Oh, you don't have. I can see your lips moving, but I'm not hearing anything from you on your new machine. No, I'm not hearing you. And if you talk, you should bring up the what's the not the chat, the closed captions, and you can see if you're talking. Microphone, you have a not working microphone? You don't have a good working microphone, but you can see my closed captions, right? Shake your head. Yeah, okay. So you can tell that the closed captions don't have any audio from you.
Okay, trying this.
Oh yeah, now you got it. Whatever it is, you fixed it.
Is it clear though?
Recite a full sentence.
Okay. In the course of human events, when it becomes necessary.
It's a little overloaded.
That's good.
It's clear enough, although it's a little bit overloaded in volume and maybe a little reverberation, but not badly.
Okay, let me try to get to my audio settings here.
I don't know that you have any option. Oh,
Okay, testing.
That's better. Whatever you did is slightly better now. Oh, wait a minute. Now you went silent. Are you talking?
Okay, so for some reason, the Logitech webcam microphone works, but the Blue Yeti is not working right now. Blue Yeti is not working.
Oh, is it powered on and plugged into a good
Yeah,
port?
the red light's on it, so
And does Zoom even see it as a device?
yes, it does. It allows me to select it. Yeah.
But it doesn't feed. Oh, that's odd. I wonder if it's,
Yeah, sorry about this. It's a distraction. We just wasted minutes here.
well, it's not a big deal. I mean, unless you're in a rush to finish today before 2 hours.
Okay, so I do have a lot of deliverables that I wanted to get to, but here's what my thoughts were on truth. Okay, so truth, as you and I probably recognize, but I just wanted to explicate, truth is dependent on a language framework.
Yeah, it's more rigorously defined in mathematics than narrative.
Yeah.
Narrative can be vague,
Yep.
and a vague thing may admit probability of truth without knowledge of truth or falsehood.
Right.
So narratives can be much more probabilistic, I think, than math. Although you can certainly have theorems which can neither be proven nor disproven, but they're pretty specialized.
Right.
Oh, here's
See,
Taylor.
whether it's proven or disproven is not a probabilistic issue. It's a logical issue.
Yeah, and there are known to be theorems which are neither provable nor disprovable, sort of a Gödelian thing.
Right.
Like,
okay, so let me see if I can lay this out, and then let's see if you can criticize or comment. So Kayla, welcome. I was actually responding to a Facebook post that I made one time this week about truth and experience and personal truth and my truth, your truth, the truth, ground truth, etc., etc. Okay. So one of the comments that I found worthy of consideration was my friend Shampa Banerjee said, define truth, which I think is a valid comment when I post something like this. So I was about to get into this with Barry. So there's like 5 or 6 different elements to truth that I wanted to talk about. And first thing is that when we are talking about truth, there is a language framework that is in place. Without a language framework, you can't really talk about anything, let alone truth, okay? So first thing is there has to be a well-formed language framework. Second, we must be able to observe. And what we observe, we must be able to symbolize and codify in that language. Okay, so there's the probabilistic aspect to it, by the way, okay? Because definitions at the ground level are associations of symbols and observation. And these observations are imprecise. If I observe a blue blob over here and you observe a blue blob and I say, hey, this is a blue blob, and you say that's a blue blob, eventually we're going to come across blue blobs and I say are blue blobs and you don't think it's a blue blob. Okay, so we have to then get a little bit more precise about our symbols associated with observations.
edge cases.
Yes. So that's the probabilistic aspect. So second element here is the observable, quote unquote, fact. And the fact is how you symbolize, how you codify, how you express in that language the observation.
Yeah.
The third is this notion of evidence. So evidence is an observation or some statement in the system that you're using as a left-hand side clause. Okay, and by left-hand side, right-hand side, I'm saying in the normal logical production rule, there's if, clause 1, clause 2, clause 3, clause 4. Okay, those are the left-hand sides. Then you come up with the right-hand side, and the right-hand side is this statement therefore must be true. Okay, so production rules have this left-hand side, which is multiple things, and then a right-hand side, which is typically one, but it could be multiple things as well. So that's a production rule. And evidence is how your supporting facts and your observations feed your left-hand side. Fourth element is a system of logic.
And a logic takes a form of multiple syllogisms, which say if you have a true statement and one or more true statements, then you can produce another true statement in the language framework that you're working in. Okay. So that is logic. Okay, so the fifth element really comes out of that. 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, fifth is derivations. So derivations are the applications of these production rules to come up with new truths. And then the last element, the sixth element, is the one that you bring up most often, Barry, which is that whatever statement you come up with needs to be unfalsifiable. Sorry, not unfalsifiable, unfalsified. Unfalsified. In other words, it could be unfalsifiable, but it has not yet been. So when I think about truth, this to me is a complex topic, but this to me are the elements of truth. So I know it's not as tight and concise and as poetic as some people might like it, but I gave some thought to this, and this is what I came up with. So thank you for giving me a few minutes to lay that out, but curious to hear your reaction to it. Over.
Now I'm just processing this in text for a minute. Let me finish the sentence.
Okay, let me put this in my notes in the text. Okay, so I'll take those 6 elements. I'm going to put it in the text right now. Okay, so here it is. Okay, there we go. Well-formed language, observable facts, understanding of evidence, logic/production rules, derivations, and unfalsifiedness.
And I map that into the situation where you have overlapping or ambiguous cases that you can't make a sharp boundary versus cases where you can make a sharp boundary and identify the sharp boundary. So in a lot of narrative stuff, you have ubiquitous examples of overlapping, blurry, fuzzy edges. In mathematics, they try to get crisp set theory where it's this or that and not some hybrid. And so the notion of, well, there's something that can be a hybrid, some of this and some of that, and never always exclusively this and always exclusively that, and no hybrids. That's sort of where narratives and mathematics try to go their separate ways. And there are those rare cases in mathematics where something is neither provable nor disprovable, but we simply don't know. And so you can't divide everything into true and false in math. You have undecidable or undecided cases, and especially the undecidable cases. So
okay, so let's not go into, I would prefer not to go into those corner cases yet.
Yeah.
There's the corner case, okay, the paradoxes, etc. But there's the bulk of what we do in daily discourse, the stuff we normally deal with.
And we have fuzzy set theory in language all the time because words do not have crisp definitions. A lot of words admit overlap, semi-synonyms with other words. So the 2 words can be distinct, but you can have cases which fit the definition of both. And that's very common in word-based languages. Narrative languages are like that. They're just, by their very nature, they're full of ambiguities and multiple definitions for the same word or phrase. It's very, very hard to come up with language which is crisp.
Well, I think the clear place where it's first introduced is the association of symbol with observation.
Yeah. And then the next, so then when can the observation be so precise as to avoid ambiguous edge cases?
It's when we define our conditions and we build our instrumentation, and then we accept that level of precision.
Yeah, you're basically down into the quantum distinction. You either have a quantum present or absent for sure. And that's pretty hard to do in narrative cultures.
So those 6 elements, I'm not sure that they're complete. I'm not even sure that they're necessary, but this is what I came up with this week. So, Kayla, Josh, I was curious if you guys had any thoughts on this. By the way, I like that this guy tracked me down. Normally, this guy is across the street, you know, the 5-acre place. And he has free roam usually during the day. But it came over here. The
I
weather's
got plenty of
perfect.
thoughts. I'll be right there. Sorry, I couldn't get to the phone in time.
So one place I think where it's sort of interesting for humans is a living creature, not necessarily a human, but a living creature has one instance only, and the doppelganger is not the same as the one that they're imitating. So is somebody really the genuine article and not, you know, a clone that's indistinguishable? Although I suppose you can have cloned creatures where you can't distinguish them, maybe. Now, when they try to avoid that, they try to avoid having twins or clones that cannot be separated, cannot be uniquely disambiguated. But that certainly turns up a lot in human culture, that a person only has one instance of themselves on the planet, and anybody else who purports to be them is a fake, is a false representation.
So connect that to truth.
So if I identify myself and somebody else claims to be me, one of us is telling the truth and one of us is lying. And in the case of human identity, I think that's guaranteed that only one of them can be true. At most, one of them can be true.
Okay, so I don't see that as a logic problem. That is not a logic problem whatsoever. That's a definition problem. In other words, define what it means to be Barry Corp. So
Well,
I don't think there's any fundamental problem with that.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a cultural problem of scamming and
Sure, because when it comes to scamming, as you
fraud and all that. So fraud is definitely falsehood.
well, no, it's not falsehood. It's manipulating definitions of identity to your advantage. Like in the financial system, they don't care about you and what you really are. To them, all you are is a bunch of numbers and a bunch of different accounts and balances. Okay,
But the genuine
that's an
article,
identity in a financial system. So to me, it's a definition problem.
yeah, and definitions almost, well, not by definition, but definitions are it's very difficult to make a definition that doesn't have edge cases. That
Sure,
doesn't have
but before you
overlaps.
go to edge cases, let's talk about the peak of the distribution here, right? You
Yeah,
gotta make sense out
non-overlapping.
of the peak of the distribution before you go to the corner cases.
Yeah, can you go to non-overlapping sets? Can you go to crisp set theory? And in word-based languages, I think basically you have to rule out that you can always have crisp sets. Every definition is crisp from every other definition. I don't think you can. I think that would be kind of ludicrous to
Right.
start that.
Wait. You don't even have to go there yet. You're the one that always brings up that all of this derived from early theology and analytic theology. Okay. So even before we get to mathematics, okay, we can use language as good as it was at the time to say this is this, that is that, and there's probably very little confusion there. Okay. And in the cases where there is confusion, then language role is to disambiguate, add more conditions to what this is or what that is. Okay.
And
that's not hard to understand.
Can you get away with a countable number or a finite number of adjectives that will eventually separate two cases? So if you have a tree with two cherries on it side by side, how many words would it take to make sure that you've uniquely identified one of them and not the other?
Yeah, but how many useful predicates do you really want to produce that really derive value from that distinction?
Well, you can argue that it doesn't really matter. They're
exactly.
Fungible.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, if they're fungible, then you don't care. So it's where they're not fungible that you do care.
Right. So if I meet a Barry clone 1 and Barry clone 2, and I don't care whether it's Barry clone 1 or Barry clone 2, then I don't need to know the difference, right?
Yeah, it's like electrons. people say there's only one electron because they're all fungible. Any electron is fungible with another electron, so you don't really have to
Oh,
identify.
that one had
every
that
single-
tattoo on it. I recognize the tattoo.
What'd you just say?
That was a joke. I was saying, no, I can distinguish that electron because I recognize its tattoo.
Electrons don't have tattoos.
That's the joke.
Yeah, that's sort of the point, is that when you get down to fundamental particles, they're basically fungible.
Okay, well, anyway, I gave it a shot. Okay, so to me, these are the elements of truth, and this is how I'm going to respond to Shampa and see if there's a interaction that flows out of this.
Although I predict that somebody will find a plausible pushback.
Yeah,
Any
that's completely
definition you
fine.
have, there
This
will
is Facebook. I expect it.
somebody can come up with a pushback that you can't eliminate,
Well,
except by saying I
if
don't like
can't,
it.
then it'll help my understanding to
Yeah.
cogitate on it.
Yeah, because you can like and dislike things which are true or false without changing their truth value.
Oh, a lot of people do. They love
yeah.
stuff regardless of its truth value.
Yeah.
The statement, "I am Superman," right? Whether or not it's true, some people can love saying that.
Or I'm a stable genius. That's the famous one, right? I'm a very stable genius. Clearly a falsehood, except that, but for that person, it's their personal truth, or at least allegedly. Why does Joshua look different? Did you have a haircut or something? Why do you look different today?
Yes, he's lost weight.
Some reason.
Yeah,
you look
I'm
different.
skinny. I have a haircut. No, I just shaved my beard a little bit.
Is that what
That's
it
the
is?
weight.
Okay.
That's what it is. Shave the beard.
Something about your face looked different.
Yeah.
Okay, but I
Here,
couldn't be sure.
bottom.
Okay.
Hair on the bottom, fruit on top.
I think the
Yeah.
colors are also a little different too, aren't they? The
No,
color,
my
color of
phone's
your
about
facial
to-
hair.
I'm just on the iPad.
Okay.
Yeah.
All righty. I love my crew. All right.
Yeah. I love my crew, my GCC crew.
Are we that crude?
I just remember that I Sam, do you remember giving this speech 6 other times at least on the GCC?
Which
The-
speech? Which speech?
The falsifiable, the 6
Oh
thing.
yeah. Because well, that's what Sam has been wrestling with for how many
I
decades?
love it. I mean, how long can you? I mean, I thought you got it down already. I thought you got all this stuff.
Evidently, Sam is still going around the bush on with some of his correspondence. So
Word.
No, the point is, eventually some other people come up and it's another opportunity to express it again and see what comes back. It's
Okay.
not the same river.
yeah, for me, the big eye opener was the introduction of fuzzy set theory, because that basically said you can't just rely on crisp set theory. Doesn't there are cases where it doesn't work. They're hybrids, and now the notion of hybrids is just all over the place. In fact,
Okay.
often it's inventing hybrids where they didn't used to exist, inventing the excluded middle or inventing the overlaps. That becomes creativity is a lot about inventing overlaps where something is a little of both and neither fish nor fowl. That's an old story of how to invent a hybrid. Well, those like those hybrid animals, like the there are these imaginary creatures that are
Chimera.
well, chimera is just science
Like a
term.
centaur?
What is it?
Like a centaur?
Yeah, like a centaur. Yeah, these imaginary creatures were which are a hybrid of two different creatures, like the bunny rabbit. That's also I can't remember now.
Like a griffin who's like a part lion or part eagle or
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, there's a bunch of creatures in mythology that are hybrids that don't actually exist in biology. They don't actually exist, although in principle they could. I mean, you have the
like a
platypus.
platypus, which is part
Yeah.
mammal, part
Yeah,
something
the
else.
platypus, which is one of those creatures where if you try to use the usual definition, it's not good enough because they have overlapping traits that used to be distinct.
What is it? They're a mammal, but they lay eggs or something like that.
Yeah, oh, that's one. There's egg laying. I can't remember, but there's a whole bunch of fanciful creatures and real creatures that are kind of imaginable hybrids that turn out to be either imaginary or real, and you don't know whether they're totally imaginary or whether they could have been real, or they could be made real.
So that's still my expression of why I think there is no such thing as my truth or your truth. What
But there can
typically
be
people are
temporary-
talking
but
about
there can
is
be
my
temporary
experience, your experience. That's usually a better word, in my opinion.
I will certainly admit of temporary truths, which are true for a certain amount of time and then become false because somebody devises a way to falsify them that never existed before. There was no observable falsification
Right.
up until some event, some invention.
But the notion of truth is still useful even in that context.
Oh yeah, but that becomes a truth that was true up to a certain point in history, and then after that is no longer a truth. So they can change at some point in history, at least for everybody who can observe those, those circumstances.
Yep. Yep.
But that tends to be philosophical. I don't know. I'm not sure how often it becomes a practical matter. It's often a philosophical matter.
No, it's very practical. See, if you don't clarify this sufficiently, then the use of this terminology, my truth, your truth, that truth, whatever, dilutes the value of the word truth. So now people can say, well, that's not necessarily true because I believe something else, which is bullshit. Okay. And that should not be allowed in journalism, should not be allowed in science, should not be allowed in law, should not be allowed in just regular communication.
Yeah, but then you have to be able to disprove somebody else's personal truth. You have to actually be able to demonstrate.
No, you don't have to. As long as you say that is your experience, that is not necessarily truth.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing. So you're both saying it's not necessarily true. It's not necessarily false. So you're both.
No.
And you don't.
In one case, someone will say my truth is true, and that's the problem. That's the thing we have to eliminate.
Yeah, but you can't prove. But you can't prove it. You can't prove it. You can assert it.
You don't have to, so long as you say that's your experience. I don't have to disprove your experience. In fact, your experience is not disprovable. Unless
you're lying about your experience.
That's a different issue.
Yeah,
that's
well,
also an experience.
Who's that congressman from Long Island who claimed to have gone to this university or that, in which fact he never did?
George, what's his name?
Santos, is that his name?
Yeah, George Santos.
Oh, I got something to say. I'm trying to be not rude.
I know.
Jesus
I said
Christ.
you had your hand up for a while.
I know, but I know. I believe you. I heard you say. I just think it's hilarious. I could have just sat there like this for like another 5 minutes. I was trying to talk before you guys are going to a whole nother realm. You said the truth, the intent of that word and defining it and agreeing upon it and giving it ultimate hierarchy over an experience, because truth and experience are two different things. So truth has a power. Does experience have the same power as truth? That's my question.
Different. Very, very different.
Because if me and Barry have an experience where we're walking in the woods, alien spaceship comes down, Bigfoot comes out, we have tea, we all talk about the Pleiades, and then the Bigfoot evaporates into another dimension, the alien flies away, and I experienced this, Barry experienced this, maybe even possibly my friend Jake experienced this. And then we tell you this is our truth. This happened. This is true. You're like, show me the pictures.
Yeah, but we can't prove it.
We can't prove it.
Right.
There's
But you experienced it. Like it actually happened.
Yeah, you don't have so if you don't have the evidence didn't survive. If the
Right.
evidence doesn't survive, then you can't prove it. You have to have
Right,
the
but we're
evidence
insane
survive.
people now because we believe that this actually happened. And Sam's going, well, that's not the truth. If you have no evidence and there's no, and then you go through the 6 steps that you just went through, that never happened. That is absolutely insane. It's impossible because of the physics that Newton has prescribed for the Earth. And I don't believe that that is a thing that could happen. And you're 100% sure because you know the truth, Sam, because you know how physics work and you know
No, no, no,
that.
no. I'm never saying that I know the truth. I'm asking how you know the truth.
No, but
And
I
say I
don't.
don't. I always
That's the
say
That's
point.
why I
because-
say you know your experience. And that's useful.
Right.
I can accept that.
Yeah. But you see what I'm getting at is that it might have actually happened. It might be real for me, Barry, and Jake. And there's absolutely no possible way because the physics of a camera, which were only invented a few hundred years ago, that's not like a long-term physics of capturing light through a lens. We don't have any way to prove that. So until we do, that is not the truth. Is that what you're saying? That's what I'm trying to.
Well, people say
Even-
pictures or it didn't happen, but now you can fake the pictures easily.
But still, I mean, there's ways to, there's a lot of visual effects
there's ways
artists and
to
people
sign
that
it.
can go through. Yeah, you can sign it.
I
Exactly.
mean, movies are full of fake pictures by definition.
I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I'm just trying to understand ontologically, epistemologically, capital T R, RUTH, the truth, the
Right.
real, the actual thing that is.
Right.
And Barry, you talked about, bearing accurate witness so many times.
Right.
How do we agree on the accuracy? I think is more of the conversation than what is the truth.
And I think it becomes a matter of increasing probability, increasing reliability. If you have a reputation for rigorously bearing accurate truth, then it's more believable. But you're still in a degree of belief. And can you get the degree of belief to be irrefutable? It's really hard to get an irrefutable piece of information that there's no way to rule it out. And certainly in criminal cases or lawsuits, there's always this even minuscule possibility that that it's not what you claim, and a lot of stuff gets off. The lawyer says, but isn't it possible that, and then some extremely unlikely, but not zero probability, not
Right.
perfectly zero probability, and you can.
Well, we
That's one
can't
of the things
deal with
about
that
science
today.
is you can't always rule out any alternative. You can get the probability very small, but maybe never exactly to zero on a lot of stuff.
Yeah. That's why the bar is beyond reasonable doubt.
Yes, yeah.
But-
It's, with 5 sigma, they use 5 sigma
Or
in-
6 sigma.
in-
But doesn't the CERN group use 6? Is it 5 or is it 6? I thought it was 6.
Most people use 5. I think there may be cases where you need to use 6. Maybe in CERN you need to use 6. I don't know.
Yeah, Josh
Yeah,
put his hand up.
Six Sigma would be great. I was just thinking that periodicity, the amount of time that all those things that you mentioned, Sam, I think are completely important to have a language, have agreed upon definitions and ontology, but there needs to be a time frame where they're allowed to change because sometimes they get
absolutely.
stuck.
That's
Yeah.
maybe I should have said that, because we evolve. So our
Mhm.
language evolves, our syllogisms evolve, our instruments and our observation capability evolve. All of that evolves.
But as they're evolving, that creates ambiguity in the truth.
Which is why I tend to use probability, and I can get the probability as close to 1 or 0 as I can, but I can never guarantee that it's exactly 1 or 0 on some question. Good, Sam.
Okay, so let me ask whether that question meant something. There is as much ambiguity with evolution as there always has been. In other words, evolution, better instrumentation, better thinking, better models, better precision, doesn't introduce new ambiguity. That's my understanding. In other words, if it introduces any new understandable ambiguity, it's been there all along.
So
Over.
Do you mind if I go a little deep, Sam? Because we've been talking for years. I just want to kind of round this off because I think it's happened in many conversations is when you're so positively, absolutely sure that your ontologies are correct, your truthism, your truthiness, if you will. I've used that word before to quote Colbert. That part that you know is absolutely the language you're using is precise, the math is precise, the definitions are precise. In a world of so many different ontologies and truths, of thousands and thousands of languages and cultures, how can you be sure? That's the real question I want to ask is how can you be so sure that this English language you're speaking or this Mandarin or whatever it is that you are using to create all these accuracies and bear witness and measure reality is the right one?
That's an excellent
That's the
question.
question.
I am not sure. What I'm
Yeah.
looking at is the person who is making the claim. What is their language? What is their definition? What is their observation? What is their fact? And does it hold together? And if it's easily shown that it does not hold together, I can disregard it. So I'm not saying I know everything. All I'm asking is, do you really know what you're talking about?
How do you know you
I
made
get
a
it.
mistake? Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, the notion that I never make a mistake, that obviously is a ludicrous assertion.
Stupid.
So if you do make a mistake and you didn't realize it, how would you ever be able to assure yourself that you haven't made an undetected mistake? And I think generally speaking, that's always an ever-present possibility that you have made an undetected mistake.
In fact, you live for those days because you want to know, hey, my thinking does not cover this observation. Now I have to expand my thinking or my modeling or my whatever so that this observation makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just
So
watching.
those are opportunities. Those are not problems.
I was just watching an episode of Cracking the Cryptic where Simon Anthony did make a mistake in logic. And at the very last number that he put in, he realized it was wrong because he had a duplicate where he should have had unique numbers. And so he had made a mistake that he didn't realize until the very last step when the solution was inconsistent. Didn't satisfy the uniqueness of,
So intellectual honesty, scientific honesty recognizes that and say, good, now I got to make a correction.
Yeah.
If you've got too
Then he
much
did that.
ego in the game, then you say, geez, I want to cover up the fact that I made a mistake. So I'm going to wave my hands. I'm going to introduce big words. I'm going to introduce fancy, complex definitions. I'm going to confuse the hell out of people.
Right.
So it still look smart.
Yeah, that's the Bell's theorem.
That's not
example.
scientific thinking.
That's the Bell's theorem example,
Yeah.
where Bell made a mistake by adopting a simplifying assumption they had no business adopting, and then inventing all of this non-locality and what's the other one? Other term that they use. Non-locality. I can't remember. They invented two terms that are baloney to explain away this mistake that he made without calling it a mistake.
Well, there is one thing that science does accept as an axiom that in my mind is probably the shakiest part of science, okay? And that is the premise that what is true here now is also true there then.
Yeah, that the laws of nature are universal throughout the cosmos.
That is a big assumption.
That's certainly an axiomatic assumption that if there is a law of nature, it's pervasive. And if it's not pervasive, then it's not a law.
What's here now is true as of t minus 1 picobillionth of a second, you know?
It may be locally, it may be a local pattern, but a local pattern is not a universal pattern, universal law. And that's a lot of sciences around disproving that some locally true theory is not a theorem because it doesn't extend everywhere. This is where black holes and all that kind of stuff are these big things. Go ahead, Joshua.
Oh, I just want to introduce the lens. I think it was it the Dutch or the Belgium, the people that created the telescope and the microscope?
Von Leeuwenhoek, was that the guy who invented?
I don't remember my history at this
lens?
moment. Yeah, I had a long day yesterday. Cusella just graduated from Chinese medicine school, so we did her.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I'll tell her. I'm so proud of her. It was just such a wonderful ceremony, and it was a Korean school, so it was very I don't know. I think Sam, you might relate to this, but very Korean, very nice, very lovely. It was a nice, a lot of balloons, beautiful red carpet, nice courtyard, very, very good honoring of the students.
The question I'd be fascinated by is where's she going to get her collection of medicines and, all these.
I have it on a USB drive. It's about 60 gigabytes. And that's just from one of her Chinese medicine doctors that gave her that
No, I'm
one.
talking about the actual herbs, the roots, the sliced peanuts.
Actual molecules, the physical molecules.
Well, that's I've been asking her this last year or so. You're going to graduate next year. Maybe you might want to start growing them from seeds. So that's what she's been doing. She's been learning how to propagate and grow both hydroponically and in the dirt, the actual herbs. I think it's important to grow your own. Yeah. And a seed bank is one of the most important things, is having a really good seed bank. But at any rate, I just say that because I don't remember the history of the actual lens the first time they made a concave or convex lens and started turning it into a telescope. But it was a country that still profits off of that invention in the 16 or 1500s. The point being is that changed science because it changed the perspective of the bearing of accurate witness through a device that gave us, cosmology.
Yeah, and Pasteur used the microscope to discover animalcules, what we call now germs and things. So being able to see very small, microscopic and telescopically very distant changed our knowledge about cosmology and the very small.
Yeah, and spectrometers. I'm saying these devices that change the world, like they say, that was one of the biggest ones, the connection of computers together. You have one giant computer in a room and it's punching out punch cards. But when that computer can talk to the other one, that protocol, that connection, and then so on and so forth, here we are talking on all I'm holding two in my hands. I've got an iPhone and an iPad, and I'm sitting outside. I've got two supercomputers next to me. That's a big change. But this is my question, is what you said, Sam, I think was so poignant, is that the time period of universal truths, I mean, physics could change completely with the invention of some new spectrometer that we've never had.
Well, the gravitational lensing, not gravitational lensing, but measuring gravitational waves, that's been theorized for a century, but only demonstrated for real in the last, decade or so.
In fact, and I really don't even know what this means, but if every time there is a Big Bang / passes through a black hole event, if we now are conflating those, it's a chance for universal constants to adjust.
Yeah. Lambda, the capital lambda is not a constant.
Right. And in certain cases, nothing gets produced. In certain cases, you'd have a very different universe.
The rate of expansion of the universe is evidently increasing. Not only is
the further out you go,
expanding,
the further out you see.
Yeah,
we're seeing well-formed old galaxies waiting to bleep out there.
Yeah, and now there are two competing theories of what's causing both the expansion of the universe and the fact that it's an increasing rate of expansion, and they're trying to resolve between two competing theories: dark matter, dark energy, and something else. And it's an unanswered question. But the presumption is there is a truth, there is a correct model, but we haven't ruled out competing models yet.
Do you guys think that each person that's living on this planet are actual transformers that are encoding and decoding information from the time they're born till the time we sit down at a table and have a conversation with them, so on and so forth?
We're certainly processing information. I don't know about decoding, because
I'm saying they're encoding it with their senses, and they're
capturing it, but the capturing can be have ambiguity in it. So you can process information without resolving things down to a distinct option and no alternatives. A lot of stuff is more than one way to interpret the data.
there's only enough disambiguation so that the entire process is useful.
Yeah.
And that's all that's necessary, right?
Remember
Brain does
the
not
dress?
need to disambiguate any more than ensures your survival. So if it's not important to do it to 6 or 7 digits where 2 will be fine, it doesn't need to expend the energy to do it with 6 or 7 more orders of magnitude. Energy is scarce, right? The brain takes energy.
Yeah.
So it's going to focus on how to survive versus how to be even more precise. Being more precise does not necessarily ensure survival after a point.
I'm just remembering the picture of the dress that was either blue and gray, or there were two different colors, two-tone dress, and people disagreed on what the two tones were.
But if you hold your finger exactly the right way, you can see it's the same color.
Well, that's a different illusion. There was the dress illusion, and then there was the contrast illusion. They were both two different distinct illusions.
Have you seen the latest Veritasium on spider eyes,
Not on
the rods and cones?
I may have seen it. I've seen a couple of potassiums lately.
It was
I don't
basically
think so,
trying to
no.
break down the species of jumping spiders, that some have 3 rods and cones,
Oh,
like,
I haven't seen that one.
and some have 4.
Yeah.
And why do the same branch of spiders that in that species chain develop a 4th rod?
Yeah, the tetrachromats. And there are human tetrachromats, but they're pretty rare.
That's what I was going to ask. Are there are actually human?
Oh yeah. In fact, so the reason that color television is just RGB is good enough for color television is because we only have 3 receptors, but there are people who have 4 distinct color receptors. They're called tetrachromats, and they can distinguish shades of gray, which RGB television cannot separate. There's a
Interesting.
4th degree of freedom. It's a little bit like if you get into ultraviolet or infrared, you can't distinguish ultraviolet from infrared because you have no receptors for infrared or ultraviolet. And these tetrachromats have a 4th receptor that can make some distinctions that the RGB model can't distinguish.
Yeah, I would love to make sure everyone took the test that I had to take when I worked in the printing world, of bunch of gradients of color. They mix them all up on a table, and you've got to put them back into order. And that tells you how your rods and cones are working.
Yeah. Now look up tetrachromats. There aren't very many, but people who are tetrachromats can distinguish things which scientific instruments can distinguish, but the average human eye cannot distinguish. Because they lie on a manifold in the RGB space. But even though they're on a manifold in RGB space, they have the same value of RGB. They're different in the 4th dimension along this manifold.
Yeah.
Tetrachromats can tell you where along the manifold they lie.
Yeah, that's why that person must be walking around with a whole different reality than the rest of the people. And
well, for example, they can distinguish art forgeries, for example, where the average person can't tell because the mix of pigments is not correct. But the mix of pigments to the human eye are indistinguishable, but they are distinguishable for the tetrachromats. And of course, scientifically, you can measure it more reliably than tetrachromats, but that's an example.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like having superpowers in the sense, like if you're a music tetrachromat, if you use that analogy, and you can hear those half tones,
right?
And people are like, say that person ends up working on a car engine, they can hear pistons and things that other people can't hear, and they're like, oh no, it's the manifold, it's this problem, it's shaking in the.
Yeah.
They can hear noises that the average person can't hear, so they can diagnose engine sounds without using the computer.
Yeah, there's a lot of examples in physics where, like the spectral lines, when there's 2 spectral lines that are very close together, because one electron is spin up and one is spin down, but they're so close together that you need very fine instruments to separate 2 spectral lines, which appear to be a single line.
Yeah.
And there's lots of cases. In fact, atomic clocks are based on distinguishing very close together spectral lines.
Yeah. Well, I used to go around meeting as many people as I could, just, running around the city of New York or just traveling the world. And every so often I hit those edge cases where I meet a human that's like, oh, I can smell what numbers smell like. And I'm like, huh? And they would, there's these odd people that have really different senses and they live a different, it's fun talking to them because they're either highly autistic or Asperger's or something, but they have a completely different reality.
Yeah. Yeah. They can distinguish things the average person can't distinguish.
Yeah. And it's real. Like they really smell colors. They can, it's not just synesthesia though. It's like another neurons fire differently at their birth. I don't know, or their DNA is different. I don't know what it is, but it's a different, maybe they are actually a branch of Homo sapien that has started to evolve with these gene differences, but they haven't fully evolved to where they look different. And I'm just saying that there are anomalies in edge cases, and we could spend time just talking about those, but then the rest of the world would be like, huh, that's so, unique. What's the point? Like, why? And that's why when Sam said the problems are the best part, I think the anomalies are the best part. That's why I lean into, okay, is this possible?
Yeah.
And it's probably not. Like I believe it. Like if I believe it 1%, I'll lean into that 1% as opposed to dismissing it because of the possibility. And it gives me an ability to think like Einstein did with his thought experiments outside of what is, to try to come up with something that could be universally true, but 99.999% of the time it was not. But that 0.00001 time that I've found it, I can't tell it to other people. Like I've experienced things and they call those experiences mystical, magical, not outside of the supernatural. But to me, I call it just I experienced an anomaly.
It's recognizing a pattern that most people don't recognize a pattern. There are patterns which will give you a distinction between two patterns which superficially are not normally seen as distinct patterns.
Yeah.
I mean, you go to the doctor. I had to go to the doctor to get clearance for my eye surgery, and the doctors use all kinds of scientific measurements because when they want to measure your state, they can't just use their own direct perception. They have to use instruments to get these values down to fine values.
Yeah.
That would disambiguate two different diagnoses. How do you disambiguate a diagnosis of could be this, could be that? Well, the measurement has to be done through an instrument.
Yeah. By the way, if I die, it's I'm trying to keep the iPad out of the sun.
Oh yeah.
I have it charging up, so sometimes it overheats when it's charging near the sun.
Yeah.
So if it does, I'll move over to the iPhone. I'm just letting you know.
Sure, you need to get an umbrella and just sit there off to blocking.
I'm sitting in a shade structure, but it's the middle of the summer almost, so it's
But you have to shade the iPad.
I threw a chair above the shade structure to give it more shade. It's just the darn sun keeps moving, and I can't keep moving in this space. So
yeah.
it's
So you think the sun is moving? Actually, the Earth is rotating, not the sun.
actually the sun is moving. It's just we're moving with it, but the sun is going around the galaxy for sure. The sun,
but so is the Earth. So
yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's the really bottom line, is that everything is moving. Sometimes it's perceptible, sometimes it's not, depending on our location.
Yeah. I mean, that was a good example that that the Earth was standing still and the sun was rotating around it. How long did it take for people to disambiguate the two cases and determine that the Earth was rotating and the sun was basically in the same place?
Well, speaking on variables, there's a gentleman, Ben Davidson, who I have not watched his work yet. I was turned on to him last night, and he's talking about the 6,000 to 12,000 year cycles of the sun going through the galaxy, and it goes through these bands of I'm just going to call it information because I don't know the word for it, if it's radiation, if it's some sort of dust particles in space, but it goes through these measurable bands. And I will do some more research, but I find that idea and that concept fascinating, that there are periodic places in our galaxy that our sun and Earth move through together.
And there are rogue stars which do not rotate around the galaxy like almost all of them. They're like Mars has retrograde. There are stars which are revolving around the galaxy completely different than most of the stars. They're called rogues because they sort of pass near other solar systems, which most of them don't. Most stars
Yeah.
maintain their separation to neighboring solar systems, but these rogue stars can go the other way.
Yeah, I was thinking last night, I was looking at I thought it was Arcturus, and then I looked it up in my thing and it was Vega, the star, because it's a different star in the sky.
Yeah.
But then I started thinking, how many things am I thinking I'm looking at that are stars, but are actual galaxies so far away and they're twinkling in the night sky?
Yeah.
And I think it's just like lately I've been doing a little astrophotography, and the things that I think are just one little light form, when I look at it through the lens and keep the exposure open, there's so many little clusters of little ones that I'm not seeing with the naked eye.
Yeah.
Is like looking at the world through your eyes and then grabbing a pair of binoculars and doing another look. It's a whole different world.
Yeah. The ability to measure things with instruments beyond our native senses has really dramatically widened our appreciation for the world around us, things that we can't. I mean, the fact that we don't get radio waves except by technology, for example, that's huge.
Yeah, well, when you broke down for me, Barry, we had that conversation a while back about the Tic Tac UFO. We were talking about there's a guy, David Graeber or whatever, who saw a unidentified anomalous object off the coast of San Diego. And what you had said to me is, what did the instrument see and what did the human eye see? And where is the disjointedness between those two? Where is the anomaly?
Yeah, which one is being fooled and which one can resolve between two cases? Yeah. A good one is ball lightning. There are very few photos or movies of ball lightning. And the question is, the ones that are published, how do you know they're genuine and not synthetically generated to fool you? I saw a fabulous a short movie, ball lightning, and it didn't look like it could have been faked, but I couldn't be sure that it wasn't faked, that it was genuine.
Yeah. Well,
I didn't know enough.
There's a really cool group of guys on YouTube. They're a bunch of visual effects artists, and you can send in the videos to them, and they hold a little forum once a month to look at these videos and then analyze them from the person that's faking.
Yeah,
that's their job in the movie industry, to fake all this stuff. So if they can't figure it out,
art forgeries and whether something's Photoshop, that is increasingly hard to find the evidence to dismiss something as a fake or forgery or Photoshop. It's harder and harder to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Well,
there was I was going to say a famous one just happened during the solar eclipse where people saw a UFO go by and they looked at it, and it's the sun hitting off of a plane and the shadow of the plane hitting the clouds and making it really looks like a UFO, because it's not the shape of the plane, because the shadow is distorted of the angle of the plane.
Right.
But multiple people captured it on video because they were all looking at the sun at the same time.
So they saw what's it, UAP? I can't remember what UAP stands for anymore. They don't call it UFOs now; they call them UAPs.
A is anomalous.
Unidentified aerial phenomenon, I think, is the acronym.
Yeah.
And so they see an aerial phenomenon that they can't explain, but they don't explain it by calling it a UFO. They say it's unexplained aerial phenomenon.
Well, and then there's also water phenomenon too. Like they debunked this one where this blue light came out of the ocean, and it was just obviously a UFO under the sea for sure. And then they just looked up the website of this submersible submarine, and it had the exact same picture of the blue light coming up. And yeah.
But it's never aliens. That's sort of the classical disclaimer. But it could be aliens, but it's never aliens.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's such a weird conversation we're constantly having, because all the aliens are real and they live inside of us and they're called bacteria. And there's colonies of millions upon millions of them.
Yeah.
And all you
Oh,
got to
man.
do is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah. Yeah. The word, when you say the word alien, do you mean somebody who doesn't come from your country or from your solar system? There's, yeah, that's the problem with the word alien. It has too many common definitions.
Well, I think that's what Sam's touching on is we need to really drill down the meaning of these words like alien, because if it's anomalous, that we're looking for anomalous things. The bacteria that lives under the ocean for 250-year cycle with no food, no light, and it's going so slowly in its path through life that it's undetectable to us because it's over our life form. It's like you have to observe it for 250 years.
And that gets down to one of the questions, what's the distinction between living and non-living? And that's kind of a fuzzy boundary. You can look at something like people argue whether viruses are considered to be living or not. And it depends on the definition of what it means to be living. And that definition is sort of a little bit, well, they haven't got the definition of life and non-life, living and non-living nailed down. There are things that are on there's things that are these edge cases, like viruses is an example of an edge case.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to go absolutely insane, but if I were to, I would have to question, am I living right now? Or as the famous philosophers would say, this is a dream and you're in a butterfly's dream. And
yeah, well, that's the in fact, I had a dream the other night that I didn't realize it was a dream until this morning when I thought I had this memory of something that now I realize could not have happened in real life. But at the time, I couldn't tell because I was in the dream state.
yeah.
And only later did I realize, when I recollected, I go, oh, that definitely didn't happen in real life.
Yeah, my dreams lately, just to share with you, I've been doing logic in my dreams, and it's really messing my dreams up because I'll sit there and I'll look at a clock, I'll look at something, and like in the last dream, I think it was a couple nights ago, I was looking at the phone trying to Google map where to go, and I couldn't find the location because I'm not really there and I'm not really looking at the phone, and my brain couldn't function properly in the dream state to show I saw the screen, I saw the Google map thing, but it was not working. It was like the phone was broken. And I was like, why is this phone broken? And I finally, in my dream state, stepped out of the dream and went, you're dreaming.
It was either Sagan or Feynman who spoke of a dream in which they were reading a book, and the book was like a history book, and they were on the page that was the current time, and they turned the page to see what was going to be the future, and then they couldn't read the next page. And they thought that was kind of interesting because they had the sense they were actually seeing real text in the dream, and then they turned the page to what's going to be tomorrow's page of the history book, and they couldn't make it out. And that they thought that was kind of interesting how that kind of broke the immersiveness of the dream. The dream got to the point where the brain couldn't supply information that would have to be there if it was for real.
Yeah, psychology is really interesting. There's a school in Santa Barbara that holds the Joseph Campbell Library. So it's symbols and meanings. It's called the Pacifica Institute of Depth Psychology.
Okay.
And the gentleman that started it, I ended up making friends with his daughter. And so I would go over his house. Him and his buddy started this university. And he had a library of Carl Jung that was so big in his house. And he said, take any book you want. I got copies in the I run a university. He's like, take any book. So I got to just sit there and read all his Carl Jung books. And I thought Carl Jung was the only person that I've read thus far that went deep enough into those worlds that he created personality types and a whole system of thinking around
archetype
32.
Characters. Yeah, he gets credit for the dramatic archetype character.
And the flip side of that, he created 16 of yin and 16 of yang, and he called it introvert and extrovert. He called it like there's an external world that we all agree upon, which is the one that Sam's talking about. But then there's an internal world that's private that we can't talk about.
Yeah, that's sort of the Freudian thing that you have the shadow side that a psychotherapist might try to draw it out or construct it, but the person can't voluntarily articulate it without some kind of a dialectical process.
Well, that's what I noticed with these people that are called crazy is they lean into their shadow side and they believe it to the point where they tell the rest of the world, you're wrong. My internal world is right.
Right. I'm a
And you
very
don't
stable
know.
genius, and I'm right about that.
And you guys are all wrong, but I'm just gonna let you guys be wrong because I know I'm right.
So, yeah, all that stuff that they're feeding you is fake news.
Yeah.
And I'm the only one who has the true news.
Yeah. And I think there's some value to that if your ego doesn't take over and you get schizophrenic and go and you split.
And I think a lot of people probably do get trapped, ensnared, enthralled, and entrapped in the mix between accurate news and fake news, and they basically oscillate or
Yeah.
get befuddled.
Yeah.
I mean, it's important to be confused where you see it could be this and it could be that, and you can't resolve it. That's really important in logic and science and mathematics. That says, okay, this paradox needs to be resolved, and that's research. And now I say, okay, either I or somebody has to do the research to clear up this confabulation or paradox, or could be this, could be that. Can't tell.
Yeah, what really messed up my mind, I think I was in 7th grade. Our teacher was trying to explain to us sets of 6 instead of set groups of 10. So 6-base number theory versus 10-base number theory.
Yeah.
And that really messed us up because no one could get what she was talking about. And instead of moving on, okay, no one gets this, let's move on. She went for a month trying to get us to understand.
She'd been better off counting by dozens, because counting by dozens in business and sales is very commonplace because you can pack a dozen in rectangular packages just fine. 6 is not, I mean, 6 is a half a dozen, but I would have gone with dozens versus tens versus
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think she read a book on Mayan culture and then tried to introduce it to 7th graders, and she literally went insane. She had a nervous breakdown and left the school. That's why I remember it, because we all were just like, you're an idiot. And then I remember the substitute teacher came in after her nervous breakdown and he couldn't handle the class.
Kurt Gödel might very well have had a nervous breakdown because he was trying to find where math could go off the edge of the space, and he did find places where mathematics broke down, but some people say it drove him crazy, and I don't really know. All I know is that there are stories about him becoming paranoid and all kinds of things, but it was probably related. And also John Forbes Nash, there was some stuff about him, because if you really try hard to sort out edge cases in some systematic way, you can drive yourself crazy, either because they can't be sorted out and you think they can, or when you do sort them out, then it causes other things to have to be similarly sorted out that haven't been. And now you've got to worry about a whole bunch of other similar cases where you got to go through the same exercise, that same problematic exercise. And you end up trying to solve too many similar problems in parallel. So yeah, I can see that. At some point you got to say, I have to adopt an I don't care attitude eventually, because you can't resolve things that you previously might have cared about.
Yeah, and I think you just mentioned that the parallel versus a series, like this can be happening here in parallel to this happening here, but trying to put those connectors, like when I study electricity, if you just randomly make a circuit board and then you go, I wonder what would happen if I welded this line to that, like the whole, like you literally have a system failure and it just fries the circuits.
Yeah, basically a single mistake in a circuit board can be catastrophic. It either makes it not work at all or it destroys the circuit board, burns. I've had circuit boards when a component failed, like a capacitor fails, it shorts out, and it'll basically burn up. I've had power supplies basically explode in burn up and exploding capacitors and things like that. And you realize that, yeah, if a component gets out of some range, it can basically fry the board or simply make it not work at all. But
Yep.
when it fries the board, that's sort of a dramatic case because you know it fried the board. It's smoking.
Yeah, I wish when we do these kind of conversations, it's like when I learned plumbing, you put pressure into the pipe, and then there is a bandwidth, or like in the music world, there's headroom, there's an amount of space, but if you go past that decibel point, it gets into noise and it gets into and I think we need limiters and gates on these kind of conversations so that they don't get to the point where you're right, no, you're right, no, you're wrong, you're wrong.
Yeah,
Like,
at some point, splitting hairs becomes an exercise in futility. And a lot of philosophy is splitting hairs.
yeah,
And at some point you say, okay, this hair might be splittable or might not be, but do I really want to spend the rest of my life deciding whether this hair is splittable or not? I'd rather go have an ice cream cone.
but there is value to that for future conversations, because when those philosophers or those people debating do so much of that work and then something gets published out of that,
Yeah.
that's a leg that someone can stand on and build upon. So it is important work, is what I'm
I
saying.
leave it for the next generation to split this last hair. It's very commonplace to in the summary to point out what further questions have arisen, which we're not going to answer. We're going to leave for the next generation to answer the next set of unanswered questions. Because as soon as you do answer a question, it automatically raises follow-on questions, which is the continuation of the hair splitting stuff. And the hair splitting stuff will probably, well, when it gets down to quantum, you can split hairs until you get down to quantum. And then at some point they say quantum particles don't exist. The notion of particles is sort of a fiction.
I get so confused with that aspect because I've never looked. What microscope are they using? Like, what atomic microscope is seeing a wave turn into a particle, turn into a wave? Is there one that exists?
No, I think the whole point is that it's a matter of mathematical convenience. You can call something a particle, but it actually can be constructed out of a wave function that has not a singularity, but a solid. There's something called a soliton. In wave theory, there's something called a soliton. So there is a wave that's moving, but it's actually a wave. It doesn't have, like a photon is a wave. Is a photon a particle? Well, in one regard, you can call it a particle, but in fact, it's a manifestation of an EM field that's traveling. And the EM field is not zero dimension. It's spread out, pretty wide. And the place where that turns out to matter is the double slit experiment, where you say, I can't treat it as a particle, but I don't know how to treat it as a wave either, except it appears to be a little of both. So you have the wavicle. So the wavicle is part wave, part particle, but to call it a particle is a convenience. It's a convenient simplification because it makes the math easier, but technically it's not right, because then you get the problem of the double slit experiment, which says it can't be a particle, or it doesn't obey the physics of particles.
Right. So on an abstract basis, we're trying to put a point to a movement and a vector and watch the path through and measure that.
That's the de Broglie. De Broglie said that every particle is also a wave. That was de Broglie's main contribution to physics, is that the electron behaves like a wave. And in fact, Maxwell says that the electromagnetic waves, there are these electromagnetic waves that what an electron does is it manifests an electromagnetic field. So I'm kind of appreciating the fact that people are saying the concept of a particle is an oversimplification. The particles really aren't particles. They're packets of energy, which are in a very small confined space, but they're not technically a point particle. The electron is almost indistinguishable from a point particle, except I think when you try to do the double slit experiment, then you can't treat it as a point particle anymore. but you
Yeah,
almost always can.
So with these large Hadron Collider smashing these things together
Yeah.
and then taking that picture and seeing these things that exist for fractions of a moment of time,
Yeah.
and then they don't exist, there's got to be some sort of dimensional state where things are moving in and out of what we define as existence, as reality.
Yeah, well, the point is that the way you model something is as an adequate model until you get to the place where you can't use the simplified version of the model. And for a lot of stuff, you can eventually find the place where the model breaks down, and you've got to refine the model for these exotic cases, the exotic cases of black holes and quantum particles. These are where the simplified version begins to break down.
Yeah. Well, that's the fun. I think the fun thing about life is you can keep doing, we could redo every science experiment ever done and then put little perturbations or anomalies like, okay, now let's do it underwater. Okay, now let's do it in frozen temperatures. Now let's do it
Inside a black
6,000
hole.
feet above the earth. Yeah, now let's do it in a black hole. I'm just saying the fun part is the location creates the perturbation, and the perturbations are always going to change something. If you, it's, in other words, science is fun because of the fact that in doing it's the doing of the experiment that's the fun part.
Yeah, the experiment basically shows you, confines the range in which the model is good enough. And then what the experiment can show you is that the model is good enough. So, for example, Newton's model of gravity is good enough for the planets, except for the small perturbation in Mercury's, the fact that Mercury precesses, and you can't explain that with Newton's law. Well, at what point do you really need to admit or reckon that Mercury's orbit isn't what Newton predicts? Because all the other orbits, you can't measure any deviation from it with, because the planets themselves have such rough, dimensions and sizes and stuff. So back in 1920, the perturbation of Mercury's orbit was one of the things that had been measured and had been left unexplained at that point. But that's pretty exotic. I mean, those exotic cases are, who cares about Mercury except cosmologists and physicists? The average person on Earth could care less that Mercury's orbit is got this slight perturbation to it.
I'm sure astrologers care about that if they're really deep into astrology.
I don't think astrology measures things to that precision.
You would be surprised how precise and imprecise at the same time astrology is when you get into Vedic astrology.
Most of the astrological predictions intentionally use vague adjectives so that they can be true no matter what. You can interpret them.
That's the one layer that most people only go to with astrology. They get really deep in the Vedic astrology.
Oh, well, maybe Vedic. I don't know enough about Vedic.
Yeah.
I know the stuff that's in the newspapers is so vague.
That's just a guy on the back of a caravan doing, magic tricks for a circus. That's not actual astrology. Actual astrology is the symbolism that goes back thousands of years to the sky itself, of breaking it into the 12 different regions and the 12 zodiac signs. I'm just saying there's some real science behind it.
Yeah.
And
then there are really 13 constellations. There are really 13 zodiacs, but they simplified it down to 12, which is good enough, but technically not quite right. It should be 13.
Well, I'm saying they go deeper. Like when you go, like, in other words, you can say Hinduism is really interesting because people believe in Shiva or they believe in, Krishna. But then when you break it down to the ontological perturbations of the gods themselves into these people had brothers and sisters and it went on, and this is the fourth incarnation of the Buddha, or like, in other words, they have so many gods. I think it's like 1 million or something.
Well, that I didn't know. I know they have the three main ones: Shiva, Krishna, And
Talk to some Indian people sometime. They'll start telling you a 4-hour story about Vishnu's third cousin.
Yeah, well, of course they have the Ganesh. Is that the elephant? Ganesh is in Hindu, isn't it? And that's so yeah, they do have these second, and of course Greek mythology. Well, almost any value that's a cultural value can be attributed to a deity. A deity is basically a storybook character who manifests some. It's like Superman is a classical mythology character because it manifests a set of value traits: truth, justice, and the American way. You know, they have to represent the instantiation of some set of values.
Well, imagine if we just fast forward 5,000 years and they're telling their stories around the campfire, and there were characters created around Maxwell's theories of electricity, or characters created upon actual laws and that created this time period with all the science we know, but they turn into myths and stories.
Sure.
Because of over time, it's hard to tell someone the math of Euclid geometry or of, calculus of these things, but it's easy to tell of a superhero that moved in a vector space of the story in this direction, thus symbolizing these real truths.
Yeah, you can do that in electrical circuit theory. You can create characters that move around an electric circuit and emulate the laws that, like, what are those laws, Kirchhoff's laws and all those. You can basically represent that. And in fact, Raymond Smullyan, in a very advanced branch of mathematics called combinatorial logic, he came up with a forest full of different species of birds, where every species of birds was an element in combinatorial logic. And it's a perfect analogy that when a bird gave its call, some other species had a practice of answering in their own call. And by this whole concept of birds answering the calls of others, he could recreate an exact analogy to combinatorial logic, the symbology of it. And then he wrote a really nice book called To Mock a Mockingbird. And the point was one of the species of birds was the mockingbird, and it could echo anybody's call. It was the only one that could echo anybody's call.
Yeah, and really what he's doing is symbolizing logic boards on a computer.
Yeah, and he was able to prove that combinatorial logic is a sufficient implementation of a Turing machine. That anything is computable by a Turing machine is also computable by combinatorial logic. It had all the ability it could compute any function.
Well, that's what I think they're doing right now with this new branch of encoding, decoding transformers and parallel and series, and letting the birds in the forest create their own algorithm.
Yeah.
Thus creating a whole nother system of linguistics or logic. Or
in principle, you could take LLMs and have them do a dialogue in a constellation of LLMs, each one being a character in or a member of a society. And presumably you could implement combinatorial logic with a constellation of LLMs talking to each other. Now, whether or not anybody's ever going to try to do that, well, I can imagine people at Google could probably attempt to do that. Whether they'll succeed and whether it'll be more than arcane and esoteric, I don't know. Because if you mention combinatorial logic, most people will never have heard of it, even though it's technically a branch of advanced math.
I have a question, Barry. Have you ever asked these LLMs or these general pre-trained transformers to not only show your work, but describe in a narrative story form how you came up with that? Because then they have to recreate a whole nother logic because they're just predictive text machines.
Well, I did something close to that. I used the Socratic questioning process to lure ChatGPT to construct my theory. And so by asking it questions, carefully crafted sequence of questions, it did construct my theory in about 20 minutes. But the problem with ChatGPT is it throws it away. It doesn't retain it.
So well, it does now. It retains it now.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know at what point can I repeat that exercise such that it virally spreads to the rest of the world? Because the first time I did it, that one instance of it then was thrown away. Because if I could again use the Socratic method, because I know that I can lead people to construct my theory with carefully crafted questions by the Socratic method, but can I get that to virally spread out? Maybe with the next generation of GPTs, that can happen, because GPTs can learn. They can be led to make discoveries, and the question is, can they then turn around and share those discoveries? Can they turn around?
I think
because they were prohibited from doing that in the first generation. They were expressly prohibited from doing that.
But imagine being Ilya Sutskever, or however you pronounce his name. Imagine being that guy doing that work in 2014, and then getting to the point where it's 2018 and you're about to jump the hurdle of these large prompting things and turn it into English language prompting.
Yeah.
And then getting to the point where you can see, okay, wait a second, there's a feedback loop, and this feedback loop is dangerous, and I can't get it out of the system.
Yeah, that's the problem. The problem is that they really want to avoid propagating falsehoods. And to avoid propagating falsehoods, that they avoid propagating anything that's novel, because they don't know how to validate that it's not a falsehood. You could have somebody construct something that seems perfectly plausible, internally consistent, but happens to disobey the ground truth. But they don't know that.
Well,
So they basically outlaw spreading discoveries unless they can independently be verified outside of the space of LLMs.
Well, I have a lot of friends that are playing with that and taking these models and letting them go a little crazy.
Yeah. So
It's pretty fun.
So I've half answered your question that I can get an LLM to construct my theories from Q&A, but I'm not yet to the point where that example, that instance, then the LLMs by themselves can share that instance with their friends. Right now, I don't think they do that.
So here's a question. Can they meaning large language models, can a large language model, now that it has better ability to redraw, meaning create a physical, a pixeled picture with lines and edges, can it draw its thought process? And then the next question is, can it teach you how it taught itself? Can it remember?
Yeah. I mean, you raise a good point, because a lot of my articles contain graphs and diagrams. And when I did this work a year ago, we didn't have the 4.0, the Omni version. So it couldn't look at it could read the narrative, but it couldn't parse the diagrams, the graphs and things. I had graphs and diagrams that were illustrative, without which the average reader wouldn't really be able to interpret all the narrative. The narrative was to help interpret the graphs. The graphs were the real source. If you only had the narratives and you didn't have the graphs, then I think you would sort of not have acquired the insight.
Yeah.
And now that they have Omni, maybe when that becomes economical, because right now it's not economical.
Right.
But go back and review those articles with the graphs and see if it can confirm that the narrative does agree with the graph. The graphs are self-explanatory and self-consistent, and maybe at that point we'll have the next incremental breakthrough, that you've got confirmation from two different independent ways of thinking: visual reasoning versus mathematical reasoning, and narrative descriptions, that they all coincide. Right now, it can't prove that the narrative coincides with the graph because they couldn't parse the graphs.
Yeah. I think we're going to get to a point where they're going to get so accurate and so perfect where the prediction is correct. Then they're going to have to ask another model to redo their work. And I think there'll be a time period. I would like to see a time period where 10 years go by and all of these language models are constantly computing and talking to each other to redo each other's work to get it even more accurate, much
real-
like humans do.
Yeah, the thing is that if something has gone viral, then that means it's easy to reproduce and you can't discard the reproduction until somebody finally shows you that there is a mistake in the original version. And that mistake is overlooked, and somehow how you have to propagate the fact of the mistake to
Right.
disqualify all the viral copies of it. And this turns out to be hard to do. And my classical example is the mistake in Bell's theorem, where he adopts a simplifying assumption that's easily underappreciated or overlooked. And now if you claim that that's the mistake that's crucial, how do you propagate awareness of the mistake so that it goes viral? And the answer is, I don't know. How do you know that something that revealing a mistake managed to not die out before it becomes well known? A lot of mistakes are identified in literature, and then a piece of literature goes no place. It works both ways. There's a truth that's discovered that's lost, and there's a mistake that's discovered that's lost.
That just makes me think of the king that had a 12-inch foot and started measuring by his foot. And now we have a whole world based off of a foot and 12 inches.
You know that's a cubit?
I've heard that. Yeah.
Distance from your elbow to, I think, the tips of your fingers.
I guarantee mine is different than yours.
Right. And I think I determined that if I bend these fingers, that's 14 inches, which is interesting because my new lenses are in focus down to 14 inches. So now I have an easy way to get 14 inches. And then I know
how are your new eyes? How are they doing?
So this one is now almost 4 weeks old, and this one will be done next Monday, tomorrow.
Okay.
They're going to do this one tomorrow. And then it takes a week or two for the edema, the swelling, to subside. So by the end of June, the end of this month, both eyes should be completely optimal, fully healed and whatever all the combinations have to work out.
Nice.
But yeah, tomorrow morning is when they're going to do this eye.
Okay. Well, you've had it done on the other one, so you know what to expect.
Well, this one's fabulous. This one's either the only reason that this one is not 20/20 is because of floaters. So if a floater's going by, that blurs this eye briefly. But once I have both eyes, then it's very rare that you'll have simultaneous floaters blocking both eyes. You'll have floaters, but chances are there's a rare occasion when both eyes are being obscured by floaters.
How are you working on the computer? Do you have to close one eye to see
No, what happens is that this eye is out of focus, and I don't really need depth. There's no point for depth perception on the computer. So basically, my brain is relying on the information from this eye, and this eye is basically ignoring it. I only need this for depth perception, but on a flat screen, there's no depth perception anyway. So.
Oh. Yeah, my contacts often get old and blurry, so I experience the
Yeah. Now, when I'm driving, I will sometimes close this eye because the information in this eye does conflate, the amount of. So if I feel like I'm seeing too much fuzziness, I'll close this eye and it'll sharpen up again. But with both, and you don't really need depth perception when you're driving because the size of a vehicle is pretty well known. I know the size of the vehicle and the size of the lane, so I don't really need depth perception when I'm driving. So if I close this eye, it doesn't really impair my driving vision.
Yeah.
And by Tuesday, this eye will be back in operation again, fully operational. It might still have some edema, so it might be still out of focus, but I don't.
Gotcha.
It'll take about a week for whatever edema to subside, unless something really bad, some unexpected complication turns up.
Gotcha. Well, hey, before we end it, I was going to ask if Sam is still here and see if he's still.
Sam wrote in the chat, "I'm going mostly silent mode now," and then he turned off his camera also. So I think Sam is basically gone now for the rest of the hour.
Okay. Well,
and it's coming up. Well, you've been on since the beginning, so you've been on for An hour and
Uh,
45.
yeah, I came in about 17 minutes after the hour.
You've been on for an hour and a half. And the only things I have to do today is I need to take a shower because they want you to shower the day before. And I do have to put drops in my eyes every 4 hours, but my next drop is in a half an hour from now, but it can vary a little bit.
Well, I'll just remind you of your duties as a Bostonian. It is the second game of the Boston Celtics tonight for the
Is it
finals. So
today?
I'm just saying, as a religion, not that you like basketball, but you're bound to at least look at the score at some point because
I don't go to that church. I don't really follow professional sports at all. I
but
know a lot of people
you're in
do.
Boston. You're in the Boston area. How can you not?
I
It's
have,
like,
except when I was in college and I followed college football for the team that, because I'd go to the
yeah.
football team, but I didn't even follow the other sports in college. I only followed the football. It was the only one that you
Okay.
ever
Well,
attended.
I'm reminding you, it's long before you came into that town. There was this long history of different sports franchises, and it's so deep and so rich that if you ever want to lean into it, the football, the hockey, the
Yeah.
basketball, the
I know
baseball.
that a lot of people basically live for entertainment and sports. They're sort of overlapping.
Yeah.
And, they need to have a diet, a fix, a sports fix and or an entertainment fix practically every day. I never really fell into the need for entertainment fixes or sports
Well,
fixes.
I don't mean it for entertainment. I mean it for the history of the location that you are
Oh,
presiding in.
okay. Yeah.
Just the historical aspect of I didn't understand it until I was given a ticket by the coach of the Boston Celtics to go see the game.
Oh, that kind
And
of a tick.
I was a little kid. And so I sat down to watch the game by myself, a little kid. And there was this guy smoking a cigar. And all these people during the game kept coming up to him and, shaking his hand. And I kept thinking, who is this guy? And turns out he was the coach of the team back in the late 50s, early
Oh,
60s.
wow. So he's a historical figure. Yeah.
He was a historical figure who was alive at the time, who actually became the general manager of the team and built the teams. And he was the person that recruited the people to keep the history of the
He
franchise.
was the founder of that team. Yeah. Or one of the founders.
Not the founder. He was the one that had the most success at a
Oh.
period of the team's early history.
I see. Yeah.
So it's
That's sort of like Coach Devaney at Nebraska. He was called the winningest coach in college football, and he was the coach. And so everybody knew that Coach Devaney, Bob Devaney, was the winningest coach in college football, and he was there for a long, long time.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's kind of like going to a university where a lot of the knowledge was built off of the work of one person who made so many patents and brought so much money to that institution that allowed them to create all these beautiful disciplines of study.
Yeah. There are certain pioneers who are absolutely seminal in their field. Edgerton and, well, there's lots. I'm not going to try to tick off the names of a lot of people who were seminal contributors that created whole new industries.
Yeah.
And to some extent, my friend Ross Picard, who picked up on affective computing, partly because of my interest in that theory, and she created this whole discipline of affective computing, which never really existed until 1995.
Yeah.
And so she has a founding role on affective computing. Considered, well, she wrote the first textbook with that title.
So, have you ever gone back to Silicon Valley and gone to mixers and networking events?
I haven't been back to California since I think the mid 90s. I think, was it the mid to, well, I might have been back to Silicon Valley once after that, but only, I went to one of Jerry Mikulski's gatherings in Silicon Valley. Might have been, I don't remember if it was late 1990s or early 2000s, but that wasn't for that. I mean, that was sort of for that reason, but not really. I guess you could call Jerry Mikulski's gatherings, the ones with Esther Dyson, I guess those were mixers of some sort. So that may have been the last time I was in Silicon Valley, once for Jerry Mikulski's thingy. And once for, there was an internet conference, I think in the late 1990s that I was there. So I think I've been back twice. But that was, we're now talking 20 some years ago.
Well, I just think the older I get, the more I talk to these younger people, and they have no idea who created what, when, where, and how it came to be in the history of it.
I can believe that. I mean, they do those crazy man on the street interviews on current events, and like, was it Jimmy Kimmel, I think, had the guy on the street interview. Do you think we should ever have a female vice president? Oh yeah, I think that would be a good idea. Who's the current vice president? I don't know. People are just completely oblivious.
By the way, those things are like reality TV. They're completely like there'll be 20 people that say the name of the current vice president.
They'll pick the one out of 20 who's a doofus. You can always find a doofus on any question. 1 in 20 will be the doofus.
And they're the most entertaining, the morons.
Sure. They're the funny, the ones who have the wrong answers are funny because they don't know something that 19 out of 20 people will know.
Yeah, I watched my favorite comedy show comes on every Monday night now, and it's a pull a bucket out of a hat of comedians. 300 comedians put their names in a bucket, and anyone could get up and have a chance. Someone who's never tried it before, someone who's been doing it for 20 years that's really good at it. And there was a guy that came on a couple weeks ago who had put his name in the bucket for every Monday for 10 months straight. Never got pulled up. He finally got pulled up, and the guy who runs the show thought it was so great that this guy really wanted to be up there, that he had the tenacity. So he brought him back up on stage 5 times during the show. And the guy was actually brain damaged. He had a situation where he'd been hit in the head with actual brain damage.
Wow.
And it was really interesting to watch a brain damaged wannabe comedian get better in real time on the same show. Every time he came back, he was funnier and funnier.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, yeah, becoming good at something, if there are things that you can't be good at for reasons that are beyond your control, then you find something that you can be good at. That's, a unique faculty. And people who are blind end up with good hearing and being able to, and vice versa. Well, maybe not vice versa, but yeah, people who have, it's like, what was the guy? The guy who had ALS, the physicist who died recently, the black hole guy. Gee, why can't I remember his name?
Hawkins.
Stephen Hawkins. I mean, he had ALS. He had all these disabilities, but he could reason very deeply, very mathematically about physics that had to agree with the ground truth, not just made up math. But so there's lots of examples of people who get very, very good at a very unusual skill because they have deficits in other things that people could have made a living at, could have made a life at.
Yeah, I've been talking to a lot of blind people, and it's really fun. Like they're the abilities to perceive things that you would think you need sight to perceive, but their understanding of language, for example, like they're reading in Braille, but they get it. Can you hear me? Is it?
Oh yeah, I was just gesturing. Yeah, so you get really good at a sense of smell or sense of hearing because you don't have this sense of vision. So yeah, you develop. So the other senses get what's the word I'm looking for? Improved, developed.
Yeah, well, they don't believe anything they see.
Because they don't see anything.
That's what he was telling me. It was cracking me up last night.
But there are these new technologies that allow them to get a pixelated tactile image that there's things on your back where you have these little pixelated fingers that give you a black and white image. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
I mean, the first time they tried it, they had the camera hanging from a rope so he could aim it. He didn't have to hold it up, and he aimed it at a candle flame, and the picture of the candle flame was gone. He goes, "Oh, the flame moves." He never realized that the flame actually, dances until he had the thing where the pinpricks on his back had the silhouette of the candle flame. So, oh,
Yeah.
the flame moves, it dances.
Yeah, I like hanging out with my blind friends just because there's so many times that we're using the sight aspect of reality, and we just take that to be a granted truth that we all can see.
I tell you, now that I've got nearly perfect vision in this eye, I realize how much I have been missing. For example, the colors are very muted in this eye. When I look outside, I can see colors in blue, and this eye is everything is kind of a yellowed out thing. And I realized that not that it was life threatening. It didn't matter that I couldn't distinguish colors or detail, but with the amount of information I was not. The one thing I like when I go out for a walk and there's somebody in the neighborhood that's say 50 feet away, I can tell there's a person there, but I can't see enough details to identify who it is. So
Yeah.
I couldn't recognize faces unless I'm really up close to them.
Well, I used to practice playing basketball with my glasses off and no contacts, just to get my game better to where it's blurry, but I got to pass it to a blurry streak, and I got to use my court sense of where I am on the court. That's why I love that game, is because there's a square.
Yeah.
It's actually a rectangle. And if you know where you are in the rectangle, you know the angle and the trajectory to move the ball.
Yeah.
It's kind of like playing ping pong with like blind ping pong, if you will. You hear
You have to hear where the ball is hitting the table to know
Yeah.
where it's going to go. Yeah, I cannot imagine playing ping pong. I can imagine trying it. I can't imagine being any good at it. That
Well-
anybody could get any good at it.
Probably a bad analogy of something that's easy to master. But if you had sensors on the table that made a different sound depending on the velocity.
Yeah, if you got more information other than just the
Yeah.
direction of the ping and the timing of the ping, because as long as you can get the information through some channel, even if it's encoded, and you can decode it in real time, then it doesn't matter that you're getting it through an alternate encoding system.
Yeah.
So that's certainly true. But yeah,
Well,
it'll be interesting to see what new activities I end up engaging in because I've got, youthful vision back again. Vision back again. Maybe I'll end up doing things that were unrealistic, in the second half of my life.
Well, I think if you could create science like a sport where you have to pass the ball, no matter what sport you call it, but you have to throw it to someone else. Like, okay, I've got this, now throw it to them. And if it could move a little bit quicker and more of an easy pass off of work from one scientist to another, that would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I have thought about explaining things in science and engineering through, people moving around in space. And there are some that I've actually come up with. I think I did one with a friend in some concepts in electric circuit theory, but those are so arcane. Like, who needs to know electric circuit theory at that level, unless you would simply have a curiosity, like how does the magic of the circuit board work? Well, some people care and some people don't. And explaining things which are interesting and arcane, but not necessary in life to know. It doesn't. I mean, you can live a perfectly happy life without knowing how electricity works. Just turn on the switch. That's all you need to know. Because you don't have to diagnose it. If you have to diagnose it when it breaks, that's a different story. But if when it breaks, you can simply have somebody else diagnose it and fix it for you, and that's not a life or death situation. I'll tell you a funny story. If I look out this window to the left, it's my courtyard, and then the window to my neighbor's garage. And evidently, she's out of town, and she must have had her son come and put out the trash barrels. But I'm sitting here after dark, and I see a flashlight in the garage moving around. And I go, And I know that she's got, they're doing work in her kitchen. So there's a guy set up a power saw in the kitchen. And I go, and I see a flashlight moving around in the dark. I go, gee, I wonder if they blew the breaker on that power equipment. Because why else would you have a flashlight? So I see it for a while. And finally I go around to see, did they blow the breaker and they can't find the breaker? And it turns out to be a young guy in a white car who I don't know. And I said, is everything okay? And he says, so he was sort of wondering why I was coming around. And I said, oh, I thought maybe you blew a breaker. And he thought I was accusing him of being a break-in. Because the flashlight in the dark, I said, I saw the flashlight in the dark. I thought maybe you blew a breaker. And he says, are you accusing me of breaking in? I said, no, circuit breaker. But he had this paranoid thing because he didn't know me, I didn't know him. And I didn't know that he was probably her son. And so we had this funny thing about.
He was the thief.
But it turned out that he was simply putting out the garbage cans because she's evidently not here this weekend.
Mm. So was that her son?
I'm a guess. Well, probably it might have been her nephew. I'm assuming that it was a relative or a friend that she hadn't put out because of all the work they're doing. She has a lot of trash. Like last week, she says, "Can I put some of the trash in your barrel?" Because she had more trash than filled her barrel. And the fact that I haven't seen her this weekend, and when her garage door was open, I could see there was no car in it because there was all this workman's equipment. But I'm not sure why I'm telling you the story, but
no, it's the miscommunication, and
it was the miscommunication. When I said I thought maybe you blew a breaker, and he he didn't get that I was talking about circuit breaker, and he thought I was accusing him of doing a break-in because I saw the flashlight in the dark. But it makes sense that he doesn't know where the light switch is in there.
Yeah,
how do you know where the light switch is, right, in the dark? So he just had a flashlight to make sure that he could find the trash barrels and put them out. I didn't realize that until I later saw the trash barrels were out, and they were out a day early.
Yeah.
So anyhow.
Yeah, I think I like those miscommunication stories are fun. It's
well, and they're not uncommon, but they're kind of a one-off story, like once in a lifetime kind of story. That's just reveals how examples of miscommunication. Because remember, I asked, a circuit breaker. I said,
"Oh, circuit breaker! You thought I was a break dancer? I'm not a break dancer." That's funny. I remember a similar story. I was with a bunch of nerd guys from Panasonic back in the 90s. And I had to, they're just so nerdy. We're just hanging out at the house. I'm like, let's go downtown. We live in a college town. We're all in our 20s. Let's go, to the bar and have a good time. And we just end up sitting at a table talking about, how he's translating French into English for Panasonic on the voice and how computers work. And he's, just being
right.
And as I'm drinking drinks, I'm thinking these guys need to get laid. Like we gotta have.
I've had people say that to me, that I was so nerdy I needed to get laid.
Yeah. Well, I was like, I gotta take them to a different club because they're just too happy in this little booth just looking at watching women, and we got to go dance somewhere. And so I took them to another club, and it was a hip hop club where people were live performing on the microphone. And so I, as a rapper, got up on stage and did this amazing rap song freestyle and got the whole place jumping.
Oh.
And so I come down, and these people that just thought I was a nerd, they're like, "Oh, wow, that was amazing. Let me buy you a drink." And they're all patting me on the back. And so they walked me from the front of the club with the music to the back where the bar is.
Yeah. And
a girl comes up to me, and my ego is, through the roof. And she says, "Hey, I know you." And I was like, no. She's like, "No, I know you. You gave me a kiss." And I was thinking to myself, I would remember that if I kissed this girl, even if I was drunk one night, I would know that. And I said, "No, I don't think I ever gave you a kiss." And she goes, "Yeah, you gave me a disc." And I had been going around town with the first digital camera, taking pictures of people and pulling out the floppy disk, making a copy and giving it to people on a disc.
Really?
And I had forgotten that I had done that, who she was. And when we got back to have the drink, I went, "Oh, I heard her say you gave me a kiss," because I really thought I was gonna.
You misunderstood disc for kiss. Yeah, I get that.
And it was because my ego was so out of control. I thought, "Oh, everyone loves me." They
Well, that's it. Homonyms. In Toastmasters and on Zoom, I get all the time where somebody said a word or a phrase, and I go, I got the phonemes, but I don't get the word that goes with the phonemes.
Yeah.
And then I look at to see if the text to speech to text thingy got it. And more, the speech to text is getting the word that I'm not getting. I'll play back a clip, a YouTube clip, and I get to a passage where I couldn't figure out the word, but the caption had it. Oh, now I get it. So it's very easy in spoken language to mismatch the phonemes to the word.
Yeah. Well, when I first got started in the 90s, I always wanted to just talk it. I'm a terrible typer. I've never learned how to spell. It is not my forte. It's hard going through imagine going through all of life not knowing how to spell or write and being dyslexic.
Well, I know people who are terrible I've seen examples of people who are terrible spellers, and a lot of times it's hilarious. Other times you can't even figure out what they're trying to spell. Often the ones you see, you can figure it out, and you realize that they can't spell. But
your credibility goes away the minute you misspell something on a blackboard and you're the teacher. All your credibility goes down the roof. You can't spell. Oh, I can't learn from you. You can't even spell.
And I have the other problem is that I realize that sometimes I talk so fast with too large a vocabulary. And so people, even though I said the word, and I can see it on the speech to text, that speech to text doesn't get what I said. And I'm guessing that's got to be for people too, that they're just glossing over something because they didn't want to stop and say, go back and repeat that sentence because I didn't get what word that was. Most people are just too polite to interrupt you and say, I didn't get what you just said.
Oh, I have to do that all the time. I'm often speaking to people with thick Indian accents, and I know they're brilliant people, but I don't know what the hell they're saying. I'll miss at least 20 words out of a paragraph that they're talking in.
Yeah. So oral communication is really rife with not catching the correct word that somebody is attempting, especially if they're using a foreign accent. And Toastmasters, we see that all the time where people will mispronounce English words because they don't know the correct pronunciation.
Well, that's a big part of communication is you don't want to correct someone and go back. And you think in your mind, I got enough of the information where I can follow what's going on.
I know what they're talking about now. Only I didn't get the point they made. But the funniest one I know of is one of the announcers on public radio didn't know that MISLED is to pronounce misled, not misled, because she'd only ever seen it in print and never heard anybody use it. And so she was pronouncing it misled until I said, no, that's misled.
Oh, that's it. That's a lot of people that do a lot of reading. It's amazing how often they've been saying that pronunciation in their head when they're reading.
Because they never heard anybody use it. Yeah.
And they never had this. Yeah, it never clicked in.
I was listening to the NPR Sunday Puzzle this morning, and next week's puzzle, or one that they pick somebody who sends in the correct answer. The problem was, think of an item commonly found in a kitchen drawer in which the U is not pronounced. So I'm thinking, well, it can't be spatula because you do pronounce the U in spatula. It can't be soup spoon because if you left out the U, it would be sop spoon. And finally, I thought, well, it could be dough hook, but who the hell keeps a dough hook, even owns one, let alone keeps it in the kitchen drawer? And so the answer is, it's probably not dough hook, and I can't think of any other object in the kitchen drawer that has a U in the name that you don't pronounce.
Are you still trying to figure it out? Because I have no idea.
I didn't expect you to come up with it either, but it's just it's sort of in that genre of like, I don't know.
When you say so I would have to ask for more, this is my brain, define not pronounced. Is it silent or is it just pronounced differently, the U.
Well, so for example, I thought like the U
Like-
in spatula, uvula has a U that's pronounced in that way. And soup spoon, if you leave out the U, then you wouldn't pronounce it soup spoon, you pronounce it sop spoon. So in a
Is
some
it the
sense,
letter U or the phonetic U? That's
well,
my
he didn't
question.
say. He said this is a bit of a tricky puzzle. Think of something in your kitchen cabinet in which the U is not pronounced. So it could be YOU.
YOU. Yeah, I
But I have that. So it's a good puzzler because typically these are ones where you don't just get it right away. A
yeah.
lot of them you don't get right away. And this is one that I can't think of a right away answer. That's mostly the case. But I probably won't get the answer at all until I hear him give away the answer next week.
All right. Well, let me know what it is next time I talk to you. I'm going to ask you if you
All
find
right.
out. That's cool. Thank you, Barry. I should probably get going.
Yeah, me too. I got to go put the number 2 drop in this eye now. So
All right. Well, good luck on the eye surgery tomorrow.
yeah, so you'll know by next, unless I see you online, you'll know by next Saturday how it came out.
Okay.
Ciao.
Cheers.
Thanks. Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.